And I was saying earlier when the first upper division Old Testament class I took in college, every week they'd hand us a map like this, and then the next week when we came in, he'd hand us the same map with all the names taken off, and we'd have to go and fill them all in. That's very expensive.
Good luck.
But I'm not going to do that to you. Because if I did, none of you would come back. I know. So with that, this map is contemporary to the period that we're going to be talking about, is why I handed out this one in particular. And we'll be using this one through the book of Joshua, and then Judges will have another map, because things will have changed a little bit. But this will be the current map, at least for the book of Joshua, which is what we're starting tonight. We just finished Deuteronomy last week, so we finished the Pentateuch, the 5 books that Moses wrote. Okay, and we read at the end about Moses' death, and Joshua, who had been Moses' aide or assistant or right-hand man, now is taking over. And we read about previously how Joshua sort of first came to prominence along with Caleb when he was one of the men sent to go spy in the land of Canaan, to spy it out. And he was one of the 2 spies out of the 12 who were sent, who came back and gave a positive report. The positive report being, yeah, these guys are really tough and they have walled cities and everything, but with God on our side, we can take them. As opposed to the other 10 who said, forget about it. You know, that we can't do it. Forget it. So after that, we read about how Moses changed Joshua's name. Originally, his name was Hoshua, we're told, which means salvation, and Moses changes it to Yehoshua. And that Yeh that gets tacked onto the front is the Yeh that's at the front of God's name. Okay. It's often because they didn't use the name of the Lord, they would abbreviate it. Okay, so we're going to see a lot of Yahs and Yahs on different parts of people's names as an abbreviation. And that abbreviation isn't the way we use abbreviations, like for familiarity. You know, saying "Hey Mike" instead of "Hey Michael." It's not familiarity. It's the exact opposite. It's because they didn't want to use the whole name of God, but they wanted to allude to it.
This is not like the Pennsylvania Yuns.
No, it's not like. Does it mean y'all or?
Just wondering.
Yeah. No.
Did you know that God drives a red BMW?
Yeah.
There's a license plate on a red BMW that says Yahweh. In Charleston.
Have you ever seen it?
I've seen it. God drives around in a red BMW.
I'm surprised someone hasn't protested that.
Yeah, I know.
But so his name was changed from salvation to essentially Yahweh saves. Okay, the Lord saves. Now to jump ahead a little, the way this name Yehoshua gets transliterated into Greek, because Greek doesn't have a sh sound. And Greek also, at least classical Greek, doesn't like having a whole bunch of vowel sounds in a row. So it gets transliterated into Greek as Yesu. And for that same reason, the fact that classical Greek didn't like having a bunch of vowels in a row, if the word after this name started with a vowel, they would put in a sigma, they'd put in another S at the end to split up the vowels. Okay? So, in that context, it becomes Jesus, Okay, which then goes into Latin as Jesus. Okay. So, Jesus, when the Archangel Gabriel shows up and says that Jesus' name was to be Jesus, he's being named after the person we're about to read about in the book of Joshua. Okay. And there's one other major Yehoshua or Jesus in the Old Testament, and that we're going to get to much later, about 4 years from now. And that's the book that's called Ecclesiasticus is the Latin title of it. The Wisdom of Ben Sirach. Ben Sirach means the son of Sirach, or the son of the Syrian. And his first name was Yehoshua. So you'll see it transliterated, particularly when if you're reading a Roman Catholic version of the Old Testament that's going from the Vulgate. It'll be the book of Ecclesiasticus, written by Jesus ben Sirach. And you'll also sometimes see Joshua, who we're going to be talking about now, referred to as Jesus. Jesus, son of Navi, which is how the son of Nun gets transliterated into Greek. The reason why in English we have this difference, why we're talking about the book of Joshua here, and then we have Jesus in the New Testament, is that the decision was made at the time that the original King James was translated in 1611 to go with or leave the Latin spelling and pronunciation of Jesus in the New Testament, because Jesus is the name of the Lord we now know as Christians. Okay? And that way, to keep it separate from the names of other people in the Bible. Okay? So this, they retransliterated as Joshua instead of Jehoshua. And they left Jesus as Jesus.
Yeah. What about Hosea or Hosea? Is that the same name?
No, that's different. That's Hosea. His original name was Hoshua.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but we'll get to him.
Okay. I didn't want to wait.
But this connection of name is there, and will become important as we go on in terms of the themes of this book. And to go ahead and let's go ahead and start right off the bat with the themes of this book. This name, Yahweh's salvation or Yahweh saves, invites the question then, what does salvation mean in this context? What are we talking about when we say that through this person, Joshua, the Lord is going to save his people? Okay. And the reason that's an important question is, we have to remember, this is happening in the Bronze Age. We're starting at about 1220 BC. That's where the book of Joshua begins, roughly. Okay. So when we get to the New Testament, and the Jews are talking about salvation and being saved, their idea of what being saved means comes from the Old Testament. It comes from books like this. Okay? So when they're looking for a Messiah, thinking about what the Messiah is going to do, they're going to be thinking in terms of, well, when God sent someone to save his people in the past, what happened? What did that person do? Okay. And based on this book, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler, they're going to conclude that the Messiah, that God's salvation is military in nature at the time of Jesus. They're going to treat that very literally. Very literally. Because what we're going to see happen in the book of Joshua is Joshua is going to lead the people to take and capture the promises that God has given them, specifically the land in this case, and then divide the spoils of those promises amongst the people. Okay. They're going to take that very literally and say, okay, well, the Messiah must be coming here to overthrow the Romans and then redistribute this land to us. Okay. Now, as we go through the book of Joshua, I'm going to suggest that what they're seeing is really there. That yes, what Joshua does is he goes and he seizes these promises of God and he distributes the spoils to the people. But that Jesus in the New Testament, Jesus Christ, does that not in a literal, not a woodenly literal way, but in another way. And I'm going to be expanding on that. As we go. The other thing I have to note here before we start is that the book of Joshua, from the perspective of most biblical scholars today in America and Europe, okay, is believed to be completely false and unhistorical. Okay? I'm going to disagree with that. But I do need to tell you, if you go and pick up any book talking about Joshua and the conquest of Canaan in the religion section at Books A Million, it's going to proceed from the basis that none of this happened. Okay. Their position is that this was written much later and was written as sort of a mythological account for how Israel got there that turns them into the heroes. And that it didn't really happen this way at all. Okay.
What do they base that on?
Not much.
The nation of Israel never existed, or that they never
Part of it is-
conquered the land that they occupied.
Well, the going belief now, see, they point to, for example, we're going to see miraculous things happen, and we all know miraculous things don't happen. So right off the bat, none of those stories can have happened. Right? So they're going to throw those right out the window. But then there's a huge problem of inconsistency when you're talking about secular history writing. Okay? Because we have other stories about conquests and battles from the Bronze Age, right? The Egyptians kept records, the Akkadians kept records. We're going to have Assyrian records, Babylonian records. All these other civilizations kept records. And in all of these other civilizations' records, all kinds of crazy, miraculous stuff happens, right? Gods come out of the sky and start throwing lightning bolts at people, and in the middle of these stories. When secular historians read those stories, okay, they go through and they say, well, obviously no gods came out of the sky and threw lightning bolts, but the basic story here is probably accurate. Okay. Right. So there's a double standard with which the Bible is treated. Okay. So the Bible is rather than taking a historical book of the Bible like this and treating it by the same standard and just saying, well, I don't believe that this miracle and that miracle happened, but the basic story is probably true. They say, well, there's the miraculous, so we're chucking this one completely. The going theory right now, if you went to a Society for Biblical Literature meeting, which is the big scholarly conference on the Bible every year in the United States, if you went to one of those meetings, the current idea of what really happened is that at about this point in the Bronze Age, a small group of escaped slaves, okay, came into Canaan from Egypt, okay, and when they got to Canaan, they saw that these kings of these city-states were cruelly oppressing their people. Okay? And 1% of the population of Canaan had all the wealth, and 99% had nothing. So these slaves led the Canaanite people in a Marxist-style revolt to overthrow the Canaanite kings and redistribute the wealth to everyone. Okay? And so then they say, then they started this nation, Israel, and none of them were ethnically related to each other or anything. So they had to make up this backstory about how they were all related and how their God had led them there. And so they made it all, okay. The problem with that theory is there's no evidence for it whatsoever. Yeah. Yeah. So and this was all just fictionalized to give them this sort of common backstory and identity as a people. The problem, again, is there's not a lick of evidence for it, archaeological or otherwise.
I mean, you take a stupid premise and you build the whole theology.
Right. It's based on a philosophy of history that they go into it with. They go into it with a Marxist philosophy of history.
Well, there you go.
And so, where everything is based on economic class struggle. And so they assume that.
Well, you're absolutely correct, and I think it's unfortunate that Christians have a group or a thinking which is politically left of center. They said the same thing about the Dead Sea. It really didn't happen there. It was the plain of reeds. It was just a small marsh. They made it across. Hosea, if you look at Hosea, the first half is about Hosea, but the second half is just an allegory. Now, I noticed you have a library that's quite good, but you're missing one book, and it's the Mr. Bill dictionary. Come here. And if you look up this term of theology, it's defined as a group of people who dive the deepest and come up with the least.
Yeah, and that's in many cases true. And so they get together and discuss their various competing theories. Their variations on this theory. Their variations on dating. But again, there's just zero evidence for it. Okay? All the evidence we have is that, and now some places, to be fair, Jericho, the city of Jericho was excavated and is one of the, if you took a class at archaeology, the first day they would say, here's everything not to do when you find an excavation site. Because Jericho was first excavated by a guy who was literally an amateur. He was a rich British guy who just decided he wanted to be an archaeologist. And he went and found Jericho and just started digging stuff up. So it's a mess. So we have no real archaeological data from Jericho. But the other cities that we've located, that we've excavated, we know that somewhere around this time, someone or something came through this area and wiped out a whole bunch of cities. Okay, there's a transition in pottery types. There are what they call burn layers, where cities were destroyed. Okay, so all the archaeology points to something at least vaguely similar to what we have in the book of Joshua happening at about this time. Okay, we can't prove, obviously, the details of the stories that are in the book of Joshua. But everything we've found archaeologically is consistent with it. Okay, so unless you enter into it with the desire to doubt it, the desire to not believe it, I think we're going to see as we go that it is fairly straightforward and fairly even, I would say, believable. When we see people, the way people act and the way people are going to relate to each other. Okay, but I needed to mention that because, like I said, if you pick up any books or if you watch a documentary on the History Channel, there have been a couple episodes of Battle BC on the History Channel about a couple of these battles in Joshua where it's nuts. The kind of things they just reconstruct and assume are behind the story that come out of no place, really, except somebody's imagination. Yeah. That's another good example. So yeah, things that just come out of people's imagination. So, that said and that warning given, let's go ahead and get started on the book itself, Joshua 1 verse 1. And here we're going to get a bit of recap here right in the first chapter. This is going to pick up. One more note, we don't know who wrote the book of Joshua. The fact that it's called the book of Joshua is not because it was ever claimed that he wrote it. It's because that's who it's about. So there's no claimed author. Okay. We believe that the stories in it and the history in it goes back obviously to when it happened. And it was probably finished in its current form sometime around the 900s BC. Because again, the Hebrew language, for example, didn't exist at this time. But the original historical records go back to the original time. Okay, Joshua 1:1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give to them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert and from Lebanon to the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, and to the great sea on the west. Okay. So in theory, again, as we've talked about before, this promised land doesn't match anything they ever actually get. And we'll see why as we go. Okay. But in theory, it includes not only what's on your map here, but the Hittites are up in what's now eastern Turkey. Okay, so when it talks about the whole land of the Hittites all the way to the river Euphrates, that's including this whole stretch of land up here,
Right to Iraq.
in what we call the Fertile Crescent now. Not just this strip here, but that whole area. Okay. No one will be able to stand up against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give them. This is echoing that language we saw right at the end of Deuteronomy. Remember, that Moses gave. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So it's the idea that's getting hammered here is this idea of being courageous. Right? Remember, this is the quality that Joshua had originally that distinguished him from at least 10 of the other spies. Right? It wasn't that he was a Pollyanna. It wasn't that he went into the land and said, no problem. He went into the land. He saw the same giants and the same walled cities and fortified cities. He saw all the obstacles that the other spies saw. But he said, God is on our side and God is giving us this land. Therefore, we can do it. Okay? And so that's the faith. That's the faith that now God is calling on him to continue to have. Right? Not that this is going to be easy. You're not going to run into any problems or obstacles. Right? Not you're never going to be afraid. You're never going to be worried. You're not going to get swarmed by 10 times the number of troops you have. But when that happens, remember what I've told you and be courageous. Remember what I've told you and believe in the promises that I've given you. So verse 10, so Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your supplies ready. 3 days from now you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. Okay. So remember, they've been camped. They've been camped here on the opposite side of the Jordan River from Jericho this whole time. Well, for a while now, since the end of Numbers. Okay. And Deuteronomy was Moses' final speech. And now that Moses is dead, Joshua is in charge. That whole generation that sinned in the wilderness is gone. So now Joshua is saying, 3 days from now, we go. Okay. Verse 12, but to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you. The Lord your God is giving you rest and has granted you to this land. Meaning, this land on the east side of the Jordan. Remember, they asked if they could stay and have that land. Your wives, your children, and your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you east of the Jordan, but all your fighting men, fully armed, must cross over ahead of your brothers. You are to help your brothers until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving them. After that you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses the servant of the Lord gave you east of the Jordan toward the sunrise. Remember, Moses agreed to let them have that land as long as their fighting men came across with everybody else and helped everybody else. This wasn't like you get to opt out of helping with the fighting. This was, yes, you can have that land as long as you help. Verse 16, they answered Joshua, "Whatever you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so will we obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey your words, whatever you may command them will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous." So not only do they reaffirm the vow they took to Moses, but they encourage Joshua with the same thing God was telling him. Be strong and courageous, meaning let's do this. Okay? So they're prepared. Chapter 2, verse 1, Then Joshua son of Nun secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. "Go look over the land," he said, "especially Jericho." So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. Okay, so Jericho is this first big walled city. It's right on the other side of the Jordan from them. So this is going to be their first target. This is going to be their first battle. Okay. And given the fact that they've defeated Og, the king of Bashan, they defeated the other Amorite kings, okay, Joshua's aware that the Canaanites are going to know that they're coming. Right? They've encamped. So he's expecting that once they cross the Jordan, battle with Jericho is going to come pretty quick. Right? So he sends these 2 spies to go and scope out Jericho in particular. To find out, to gauge the strength of the city and its walls. Remember, as we talked about before, there aren't nations in Canaan at this time. We talk about the Canaanites and the land of Canaan like it's one big country, but it's really not. Each of these cities is independent and is run by its own king of that city. Okay. Sometimes they're able to band together, occasionally, put their differences aside for some issue or other, but for the most part, they're governed completely independently. And there's all kinds of politics going on between these cities too. You know, so some cities would be perfectly happy to see their neighboring city get conquered. Others would be willing to join with them for defense. So as we go through the book of Joshua, we're going to get a little bit of that politics too. Okay. And so these two spies, they go into the city of Jericho. They need to find a place to stay. Right? Since they're spies, they don't want to be obvious. They're travelers. Okay? So they figure the best place for them to board and keep a low profile is going to be in a house of prostitution. Okay? So they go to stay with a prostitute named Rahab. Okay. Verse 2, the king of Jericho was told, "Look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land." So they weren't that sneaky, apparently. Or at least not sneaky enough. Somebody sees that these 2 have come from across the river. Right? They know what's up, so they warn the king. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab, "Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land." Okay? Meaning, they're not here on a business trip. Right? They're here because they're planning on coming and attacking. Verse 4, but the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, the men left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly, you may catch up with them." Okay, now this time in history, obviously we don't have electric lights. Right? We don't have street lights. So the gates of the city would be open during the day for commerce, for caravans to come through, for people to travel. At night, everything was sealed off against attackers. So Rahab has hidden these two spies, ask where they are. She says, I don't know, they took off right before you closed the gate. I bet you if you take off after them, you could probably find them. So she sends them on a wild goose chase. Verse 6, but she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. They figure, well, they're probably going back to report, so they start heading for the Jordan River. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that Yahweh has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts sank and everyone's courage failed because of you. For Yahweh your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Okay? So not only has word apparently reached them about the fact that they're over there and they fought Og and Sihon, but the whole story has reached them about their God defeating Egypt. Okay? And more than just the story having reached them, remember in Deuteronomy over and over again, what was Moses trying to remind the people of? This story. Right? You can tell you, remember this story. Remember what happened. Remember how God saved you. Okay? Remember it. Believe it. Right? This is at the core of what he's trying to get at. Well, this woman, who's a Canaanite and a prostitute, has heard this story and believes it. Has heard this story and believes it. Okay? More than a lot of the Israelites, as we saw that whole generation that died in the wilderness. So this Canaanite woman has more faith than they did. Okay. So she professes this faith that she has, and then she says, now then please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Okay? She says, look, I helped you out, and I spared your life, and it's because I believe in your God. Right? So now, help me out here. I know what you're about to do to the city. Protect me and my family.
She is also saying Satan's death.
Well, yeah, because she knows death is coming on the city.
That's not what she's saying. She believes in Yahweh, and she's saying Satan's death. I just don't know.
Well, in this case, the death is coming from Yahweh. That the city is under judgment. Okay, but she clearly has faith. In verse 14, the men reassure her and say, "Our lives for your lives," meaning if anything happens to any of you, may we be executed. Right? So they're saying, "We'll make sure. If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land."
Well, also, you've got to see what the Bible says also in Proverbs of a woman who collects flax, that she is a righteous woman, because she's asking for mercy, yes, but she's also taking care of her family.
Yeah.
And I did read, and I don't know how accurate this one is, but while she was gathering more flax, at a certain time, it was when the Jordan was flooded. She noticed also the gathering of flax, but the water had receded. And that was the time that Israel crossed.
Well, we're going to get to that in a little bit here. We're jumping a little ahead, but yeah. Okay. So verse 15, so she let them down by a rope through the window. Okay. The idea here being she lives in, the walls around these cities wasn't just like a big brick wall. These walls were sometimes 20 and 30 feet thick. Okay? And they had what we would now call apartments. openings where people lived inside the walls. Okay, particularly high up. And so the gate, it's at night, so the gate is closed, but she has an outside window on the outside of the wall. So she lowers the two spies down on a rope so they can get away. Now she said to them, "Go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way." So she's saying, I sent them out on a wild goose chase that way. Don't go that way, or they'll catch you. Go over here in the hills and hide. When you see them come back, then make a break for it. The men said to her, "This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us, unless when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. And unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house. If anyone goes outside your house into the street, his blood will be on his own head. We will not be responsible. As for anyone who is in the house with you, his blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on him. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear." "Agreed," she replied, "let it be as you say." So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. So what they're telling her is, get all your family together here in your house, hang this red cord out your window as a marker. We'll let everyone know not to go into that house and not to touch anyone when we come through to wipe out this city. Okay? Now God has commanded that this city be completely destroyed. So they say, this will be the marker. Now, part of what we're going to be doing, now that we finish the Pentateuch and we're getting into the rest of the Old Testament, part of what we always need to do as we read the rest of the Old Testament is think about the people reading this already know what's in the Pentateuch. So we're going to see references back to things that happened in the Pentateuch. Okay. Now I'm going to suggest that there's an incident in the book of Exodus that's very similar to this. Remember Passover. Right, the 10th plague that comes on Egypt, God comes to the Israelites and says the angel of death is going to move through Egypt and kill all of the firstborn. Right? Mark your door, the lintels of your door, with the blood of a lamb, also red. And all those houses, the angel of death will pass over. Okay? So that judgment that was coming on Egypt, okay, those who were obedient and offered the sacrifice that God commanded and marked their doors, they were passed over. So this is really the same offer being made to Rahab. Okay, because you believe this marker, this red, this crimson marker, leave it here, and then when the rest of the city is being what? We will pass by your house. And we talked about when we talked about the Passover, of course, how this is a pointer forward. How in the New Testament, this is particularly the Gospel of John, he connects Christ's death on the cross to the death of the lambs for the Passover. Okay. The idea being, as this world is judged, those who are marked with the blood of Christ are passed over. Okay. We have another allusion to that here with Rahab. Again, this idea of this marker of blood. So verse 22, when they left, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days, until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the two men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." Okay? So, we see the attitude of these two spies again, recalling Joshua and Caleb. You know, yeah, there's big walls. Yeah, there's a big gate. Yeah, we almost got caught. Yeah, we had to sneak it out. But we can do this. We can do this because God's on our side. And they all fear us. So chapter 3, verse 1. Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. And after 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests who are Levites carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 1,000 yards between you and the ark. Do not go near it. Okay. So this is going to be the signal. Okay. When the ark is picked up, then everyone's going to get up and follow the ark of the covenant, but at a respectful distance of about 10 football fields. So it's a ways off. It's a ways off. And remember we talked about when the ark was first built, what Moses commanded was said when they lifted up the ark to go, "Arise, O Lord, and enter thy rest, thou in the ark of thy salvation." Okay. We've already seen this theme of rest that's coming up in the land once it's taken. Okay. So verse 5, then Joshua told the people, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you." Joshua said to the priests, "Take up the ark of the covenant and cross over ahead of the people." So they took it up and went ahead of them. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the ark of the covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river." Joshua said to the Israelites, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. See, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. And as soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, the water flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap." Okay. Now you notice this refrain of the Lord of all the earth. The Lord of all the earth. Again, it's not just that God is the God of Israel, the way all these cities had their gods, and the Egyptians had their gods, and the Hittites had their gods. Yahweh is the God of all the earth. Okay? Which means they could defeat the Girgashites, the Amorites, and all the otherites. Because God is their God too. Right? God has authority over them. It's not God's going to get in a fight with their God and beat them up. It's that He's their God too. And not only is He the God of all those ites, but He's also the God who created, for example, the Jordan River. So if He wants it to stop flowing, it will stop flowing. If He wants it to stop in a particular place and all pile up in a big mound of water, it'll happen. Verse 14, so when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Okay? So, at this time of year, it's flooded out. Okay, at harvest, and then the idea is it recedes in the spring, leaving good soil so that you can then plant crops in that soil. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan. You can see it on the map. Okay. So they actually give you a location where this happened. While the water flowing down to the Sea of the Arabah, the Salt Sea, also known as the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. So when they get to the middle with the Ark, they stop with the Ark, and wait for everybody else to file through. Now, this isn't like the Red Sea where you see the picture of the Ten Commandments of the two walls of water, because this is a river. So the picture we have is there's this huge wall of water up here by Adam, and it's dry all the way down to the Dead Sea because there's no water flow. Okay. Now this story gets referenced at one particular feast, and you're not allowed to answer. In the Orthodox Church, one of the major feasts of the church. Does anybody know which one? The top of their head? Yeah. Theophany or Epiphany. January 6th, Christ's baptism. Okay. If you listen carefully to the prayers, particularly the prayers of the great blessing of the water, the Jordan saw and turned back when it saw Christ coming in. And if you're listening carefully to that, and you've read the story about Jesus being baptized, you may have said, wait a minute, there's nothing in that story about the Jordan turning back or splitting. This is what it's referring to. Okay. Remember, Yehoshua and Jesus have the same name. Okay? So here we see the beginning of Joshua's ministry is what? He comes out of the wilderness, crosses the Jordan River, comes into the land to take it, right? How does Jesus begin his ministry in the New Testament? He goes into the wilderness for 40 days, not 40 years, but 40 days and 40 nights. Then he comes and is baptized in the Jordan, comes out of the Jordan into the land to take it back. It's also for this reason that September 1st, which is the beginning of the Orthodox Church year, it's the first day of the Orthodox Church year, we remember the beginning of Christ's ministry, and it's also the feast day of Joshua, son of Nun, of this Joshua who we're reading about. Okay, because there's this connection. And if you look at the icon for Theophany really closely, and you look at the river, there are these two weird little guys who look like characters from SpongeBob SquarePants. And you may wonder who they are. Well, part of what's going on here is, I was just talking about Yahweh being the God of all the earth, right? At this time, just like in Egypt, when we were talking about the plagues on Egypt, we talked about how they worshiped the Nile River. Because it was the flooding of the Nile River that gave them the land they needed to grow crops to eat to survive. Right? So they worship the Nile as a god. In the same way, the Canaanites worshiped the Jordan River as a god. And they worshiped the Jordan River as a god. Because it was the source where they got their land to plant their crops. Okay? And so, when you see Jesus being baptized in that icon, and he's standing on the two planks on the snakes, and there's those two little characters there represent these pagan river gods that were worshipped back in Joshua's time. Okay? Who got shown up pretty badly here in Joshua's time when the people were able to cross the river on dry ground, and then finally got crushed by Christ when he was baptized. When he was baptized in the Jordan River. That's the symbolism, and that's the connection here. Okay. So this display isn't just, for example, if you're sitting in Jericho on top of the wall watching this happen, right? It's not just, wow, that's crazy. Right? They crossed on dry ground. This is, their God has already pretty much kicked your God in the teeth. Right? And so, if they were scared before, right? You know, if you can make a river turn around like that, your walls probably aren't going to do much. Right? So there's a little foreshadowing there. Okay, and in chapter 4, verse 1, when the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priest stood, and to carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight. Remember, this is a command that they were given by Moses. Moses said, take some stones that were smoothed by the river. Well, Joshua here sort of does one better. He goes out to the middle of the river while the priests are there and gets stones from smack in the middle of the deepest part of the Jordan River.
As a reminder to them after they lose their faith in a couple of hours.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay, so Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder. So these are not little pebbles, these are big rocks. According to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be memorial to the people of Israel forever. Okay. So there's a permanent marker put here. Okay. This is part of the Orthodox understanding of places being made holy by what has happened there. Okay? Or the idea of taking a pilgrimage, which Orthodox Christians may kind of take for granted, but which the idea of is rejected by a lot of Christians. Okay? God here commands this place where this has taken place is to be remembered for all time. And when your children see these stones and ask, meaning you're going to come here with your children, right? For your children to ask this question. You're going to come here with your children. They're going to say, what do these stones mean? And you're going to tell them so they can see this is where it happened. It really happened. It's not just a story in a book. Right? That when God has worked through people and places and things, right, those people and places and things are made holy as a result. Verse 8, so the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua. And they carried them over with them to their camp, where they put them down. Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant stood. And they are there to this day. So this was compiled at some time later, like I said. But even at the time it was compiled, probably a couple centuries later, right? They're saying you could still go there and see where this happened. Now the priests who carried the ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything the Lord had commanded Joshua was done by the people, just as Moses had directed Joshua. The people hurried over, and as soon as all of them had crossed, the ark of the Lord and the priests came to the other side while the people watched. The men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over, armed in front of the Israelites as Moses had directed them. About 40,000 armed for battle crossed over before the Lord to the plains of Jericho for war. That day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they revered him all the days of his life, just as they had revered Moses. Then the Lord said to Joshua, command the priests carrying the ark of the testimony to come up out of the Jordan. So Joshua commanded the priests, come up out of the Jordan. And the priests came up out of the river carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. No sooner had they set their feet on the dry ground than the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and ran at flood stage as before. Okay, so not only does the river keep flowing, but it stays flooded. So it wasn't just that there was a dry spell, right? And so the river was reduced to a trickle. Something miraculous happened. On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. You can see Gilgal, there's a question mark there because Gilgal was not a city. It was an area. So we don't have any archaeological remnants of it. That's why there's a question mark. Okay, it's an area near the city of Jericho where we think Gilgal would have been, most likely. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. He said to the Israelites, in the future when your descendants ask their fathers, what do these stones mean? Tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan just what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. Again, we have that theme. He's God of all the earth. Okay? And I'm going to keep pointing that out as we go through, because in this book, it's particularly important. Because there are people today who use this book to argue that people, some of whom are ethnically descended from Abraham, have the right to go in and kill whoever is living on this land and take it for themselves again. Okay? But even in this book, at the time it was written, it was not about Israel as God's favorite people. Okay? God was doing these things through Israel for the benefit of everyone on earth. Right? What he wanted for Jericho, he didn't want to destroy Jericho that he's about to wipe out. He wanted everyone in Jericho to make the choice that Rahab made. Okay? Because we're told God wills that none should perish. Okay? But unfortunately, Rahab is the only one in this whole city, just like Lot was the only one in Sodom, who believed. Okay. Rahab, Canaanite. That's the intent here. Okay. This is not about how great Israel is and how horrible everyone else is. And it's not about Israel having a right to this particular piece of land. Because in fact, we're gonna see as we get toward the end of Joshua the exact opposite. But again, God is doing this. God did this in the Jordan River so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. So that you who know me right now won't turn away from me, and so that everyone else will know me. To summarize. So chapter 5 verse 1, Now when all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan and all the Canaanite kings along the seacoast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until we had crossed over, their hearts sank and they no longer had the courage to face the Israelites, as you might imagine. At that time the Lord said to Joshua, Make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites. So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites at Gibeat Haralot. Gibeat Haralot means hill of the foreskins.
It says circumcising the second time.
Yeah, now, as we know, that's not physically possible. Right, the explanation is going to come up here in just a second. But I wanted to say that the place is called the Hill of Foreskins. Now this is why he did so, verse 4. All those who came out of Egypt, all the men of military age, died in the desert on the way after leaving Egypt. Remember, everyone who was over 20 years old at the time they left Egypt died in the wilderness. So everybody, is gone. All the people that came out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the desert during the journey from Egypt had not. Well, why is that? They couldn't do it in the desert? See, it wasn't just one thing that generation did that caused God to cut them off and let them die in the wilderness. We talked about this idea with the Canaanites, where God is referred to it as the cup of iniquity being full. God bears with people in patience. Okay? How many times did we read already that those people rebelled before God finally said, look, you're all going to die in the desert? About a dozen. Well, now we're finding out that in addition to all those other things we read, they hadn't circumcised any of their children, apparently. Okay? So it continues. It wasn't just they were doing fine and they made a misstep and God got angry and now you're all going to die, right? It was they spent all these years defying God in every commandment he gave them. Trying to kill Moses, trying to rebel, trying to go back to Egypt in every way possible. And finally it reached the point of no return, where they received judgment for what they'd done. So verse 6, the Israelites had moved about in the desert 40 years until all the men who were of military age when they left Egypt had died, since they had not obeyed the Lord. For the Lord had sworn to them that they would not see the land that he had solemnly promised their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So he raised up their sons in their place, and these were the ones Joshua circumcised. They were still uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way. And after the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained where they were in camp until they were healed. As you'd expect, they're not going to go into battle the next day after being circumcised. And in verse 9, then the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. So the place has been called Gilgal to this day. Gilgal is based on the Aramaic word to roll. So the idea being, okay, now that they've been circumcised, forget about that previous generation. We're starting fresh now.
So it's the rock and roll.
It's the rock and roll play, yeah. Okay. So in verse 10, on the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. The day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate the produce of Canaan. Okay. So they've been circumcised. They've got this new start. They're starting off right? They're observing the Passover like they're supposed to. Okay, and this Passover is a special Passover because now they're not very far into the land, but they're in the land. And so now they're eating the food from the land, the wheat. They're able to make bread. They're able to get their own food, and so the manna stops because they're not in the wilderness anymore. Verse 13, now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, are you for us or for our enemies? Okay. So he sees this guy. Whose side are you on? Right? You with them over there in Jericho, or are you with us? Verse 14, neither, he replied, but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come. Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, what message does my Lord have for his servant? Commander of the Lord's army replied, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. Now the last part, what does that remind anybody of? The burning bush. Right? When God appeared to Moses. So who is this man?
Jesus.
It's God. Yeah. So this man who he's seeing is God. Okay. Also, you notice, as we'll see later, when angels appear to people and people fall down in front of them to worship him, they tell him to get up. He doesn't tell him to get up. Okay. Doesn't tell him to get up. So, another point here, that neither or no that's there at the beginning of verse 14 is very important. So remember the question that Joshua asked. Are you on our side or are you on their side? And God's answer is no. I'm the commander of the Lord's army. No. I'm my own side. I'm my own side.
Are there two people here? Because when he asked them, are you on my side?
Yeah.
He said to them, I am now come, the chief captain of the host of the Lord.
That's a
Then
study
in the
Bible.
footnotes, it
Yeah.
says the chief captain, whose tradition holds to be the archangel. Michael.
Yeah.
But then this man, which is Jesus,
Who's clearly, who Joshua calls his Lord.
yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to see in 2 verses, this man speaks again, and it says, the Lord said to Joshua. So I saw that footnote, and it's true in Orthodox tradition that St. Michael is the leader of the angelic armies, but I don't see anything about St. Michael here. And if you go on in the future footnotes on the next few verses, they compare it to the burning bush, and they talk about it being God. So I'm not sure how that footnote ended up there. Okay, but that neither is important, because again, what did God tell them in Deuteronomy? If you love me with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, if you follow the commandments I've given you, then I will go before you and I will drive out the Canaanites. If you don't, then you will face defeat. Okay? So Joshua says, are you on our side or theirs? He can't answer either of them, right? The question isn't, to paraphrase Abraham Lincoln was asked during the Civil War if he thought God was on the Union side. And he said the question isn't whether God is on our side, the question is whether we're on God's side. And that's the question here. The question isn't, is God on Joshua's side or Jericho's side? The question is Joshua on the Lord's side? Okay. The other important thing here, I know this is completely illegible chicken scratching for you guys. But when he says he's the commander of the army of the Lord, this is how it's generally translated here. What it says is, this is Tzava Yahweh. Okay? This word that's translated army, or sometimes as host, is from a verb that we first saw back in Genesis. Remember, God spoke and the waters teemed with life? That verb that's translated teemed is savah. Okay, this idea of being many, or a multitude. And in Exodus, when the people of Israel were reproducing and Pharaoh looked out and saw how many of them there were, he said they were teeming. They're teeming. Okay, so this is the idea of a multitude, or this huge amount. Okay. The reason this is important is that this gets turned or flipped around, which is what this is here, which is Yahweh Tzavot, God or the Lord of hosts, and becomes a title for God. When you read Lord of hosts, the hosts there, it's not talking about Jay Leno and Johnny Carson. It's talking about military armies, military hosts. And this Tzavaot is what gets translated into English as Sabaoth. So in every liturgy, we're saying, Holy, 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 Lord of Sabaoth. Okay? That's what that is. It's a transliteration of this Hebrew word. It means Lord of hosts. It does not mean Lord of the Sabbath. Okay? The Hebrew and Aramaic word for the Sabbath is Shabbat. Okay, this is Sabaoth. They start with different letters. Okay? Now this, if you're good at sword drills and can get to Psalm 24 really fast. That's Psalm 24. Psalm 24 King James Version. 23 in the Septuagint. Starting in verse 7, I'll just read. I think this will sound familiar. Lift up your heads, O you gates, be lifted up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O you gates. Lift them up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is he, this King of glory? The Lord Almighty. He is the King of glory. You can't answer. Where's that from liturgically? Right. We're standing outside the door. And the rush service, we're standing outside the door. Okay. This is referring to this image of Christ with the drawn sword. Okay. Now, how does this image of Christ connect then to Easter, to Pascha, particularly in that context? Well, what are the doors? So, the gates of Hades, right? Gates of death that are holding people in, right? That are kicked down. Okay? We talked about the crossing of the Jordan, the connection between that and the beginning of Christ's ministry. Well, here's the end. Here's the end of Christ's ministry. Okay? The Canaanites he's fighting are not human beings. Okay? They're definitely not modern day Palestinians. They're maybe the gods of the Jordan River, since St. Paul tells us all the gods of the nations are demons. Right? They're the spiritual powers, sin, death, hell, spiritual powers who use them, who have taken control of us, who have captured us, who have laid hold of us. That's who Christ is liberating the land and its people from. Not just a strip of land in the Mediterranean, but the whole world, because he's the God of the whole earth. He's the God of the whole earth. So we take this battle to be a picture of the real battle. Of the real battle. Which is St. Paul tells us is not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities in the heavenly places. And that's what St. Paul is getting at. St. Paul is getting at. Okay. This goes back to how I started tonight in the introduction, talking about themes. Okay. What is salvation? Salvation is presented here in a military sense. Okay. It's God in Christ winning a victory, a military victory, and then dividing the spoils among his people. Okay. But that military victory isn't against some other group of human beings. We're not fighting over a piece of land. What we're fighting over ultimately is our soul, our eternal destiny. That's the battle that Christ wins. The battle against death and against hell on our behalf. And this is what St. Paul is talking about when he says he led captivity captive and gave good gifts to men. This idea that Christ won. And so all the spoils are his. He says, all authority on heaven and in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Okay? And so he can give us the gifts of eternal life, of peace, of joy, of hope, of the Holy Spirit. Okay? Because he's conquered the enemy and he's won. And now has them to give. So it isn't that the Jews at his time had a wrong idea that the Messiah was going to be a military figure or fight a battle. It's just they had a wrong idea of who their enemy was. And they had a wrong idea of what kind of battle it was going to be. And so they ended up choosing the losing side when the battle finally came about and when they reached the point of crisis. Okay. I think that's probably a pretty good place. I didn't get to chapter 6, but I think that's a pretty good place to stop for tonight. Next week I'm going to be at the Antiochian village with the teens, Lord willing. And I don't think I'm going to get back in time to do Bible study. And if I do, I'll probably be unconscious. and not able to do a Bible study. So,
It's in the bulletin.
yeah, even though it was in the bulletin. We won't, so we won't have Bible study next week. But I want to try to do chapters 6 through 11 2 weeks from tonight. And we'll talk about those. And again, if you can, hold on to your map. Otherwise, I will have some every time until the next map comes out. And so unless there are any questions, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, I will correct.